If you've ever opened a research paper and thought, I want to understand this, but this is dense, then this podcast is for you. Every day, thousands of research papers are published. Most of them are rigorous, insightful, and almost impossible for non-specialists to read comfortably. But the ideas inside them shape medicine, technology, business, and society. Welcome to One Paper Orbit. We are a research paper podcast. Here, we take peer-reviewed research and turn it into clear, structured conversations without adding speculation, without exaggeration, simply making the original work easier to understand.
Today, we are discussing a paper authored by Romana Hanif, Philippe Revaux, Gabriel Barron, Lena Gosen, and Isabelle Boutron titled Factors Associated with Online Media Attention to Research, a cohort study of articles evaluating cancer treatments, published on July 1st, 2017 in the journal Research Integrity and Peer Review.
This discussion is based on a paper published under the Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 license. The original authors retain credit for their work. This podcast provides an adapted explanation for educational purposes with full citation and license information provided in the description.
So, with all the legalities out of the way, we can actually get into the deep dive.
Let's do it. And I actually want to start by addressing you, the listener, directly for a second, because I want you to think about the last time you saw a health headline on your phone.
Oh, yeah. We all see them constantly.
Right. Maybe it was on Facebook, or maybe it was a push notification from a news app, something like, I don't know, blueberries / cancer risk by 40%.
Or the classic, red wine is good for your heart, one that always makes the rounds.
Exactly. You click it, you read it, maybe you share it with your family chat group because, hey, everyone likes blueberries, right?
It confirms what we want to believe. It's the whole ecosystem of information we live in today. We see a catchy headline, it confirms a hope or a fear, and we just engage with it.
We do. And in that exact moment, there is a very specific mechanism happening in our brains. We sort of assume that because this story is everywhere.
Because it's viral.
Yes, because it's viral, we assume it must be important. And more critically, I think, we assume it must be true. We have this built-in bias where we assume that the bigness of a story correlates directly with the goodness of the science behind it.
Right. We implicitly trust that the system, the media, the algorithms, the scientific community has somehow filtered the absolute best, most rigorous work to the top of our feeds.
That is a fundamental assumption of the modern media age, isn't it?
It really is. Popularity acts as this proxy for quality.
Yeah.
We assume that if CNN, the BBC, and half of Twitter are all talking about a specific study, well, it simply must be the most critical scientific breakthrough of the month.
But today's paper is essentially walking right up to that assumption and just smashing it with a hammer.
Completely dismantling it.
Yeah. We are looking at a study that asks a really uncomfortable question about both the medical industry and the media. Does going viral actually mean the science is any good? Or is the whole system just, rigged by something else entirely?
It is a fascinating look under the hood of how medical knowledge actually moves from the lab bench to your morning news feed. And the authors, Hanif, Boutron, and their whole team, they decided to focus specifically on cancer research.
Which is high stakes.
Incredibly high stakes. They wanted to know why some cancer papers become these massive global news events, while others, which might actually better more rigorous science, just die in total silence.
It's a study about the attention economy, but specifically the attention economy of science. So before we get into their findings, which I have to say are honestly a bit alarming,
Very alarming.
we need to set the stage. We need to understand the old world of measuring scientific impact versus the new world. Because for a long, long time, scientists didn't care about Twitter.
No, not at all. Traditionally, if you were a researcher, you really didn't care if the general public knew who you were. Your metric for success was citations.
Okay, let's unpack that for everyone. Walk us through the citation economy. How did that actually work?
It's essentially a peer endorsement system. So you do an experiment, you publish a paper, and then you wait.
You just wait.
You wait for other scientists in your field to read it. Then they have to design their own experiments, run them, write their own papers, and then reference or cite your original work in their bibliography. It's this incredibly slow, cumulative process.
It's like earning interest on a savings bond or something.
That's a great way to put it. And the currency there is credibility. The more citations you have, the more impactful you are deemed to be by your university or the people giving out grant money.
It's an internal scorecard.
Exactly. But there are two massive, glaring problems with relying purely on citations in the modern era. first, they're just incredibly slow.
Because science takes time.
Right. It can take 3, 4, even 5 years for a paper to accumulate enough citations to be considered a quote-unquote classic in its field. And in a fast-moving field like oncology.
Where patients are literally waiting for treatments right now.
Exactly. 5 years is a lifetime. It's too slow.
That lag time is a huge issue.
Mm.
If you discover a potentially game-changing treatment today, waiting 5 years for the academic community to give it a thumbs up via citations feels pretty archaic. What's the second problem?
The second problem is that it's an echo chamber.
How so?
Well, citations only measure impact within the scientific bubble. They tell you if other biology professors think you're smart. They tell you absolutely nothing about whether your work is reaching policymakers or hospital administrators or the patients themselves.
Or the taxpayers who probably funded the research in the first place.
Right. A paper could be cited 1,000 times by other lab researchers but never actually change a single doctor's prescription habits in the real world.
Which brings us to the new reality that this paper describes. The internet happened. And suddenly, the scientific community needed a new way to measure impact that wasn't just, counting dusty bibliographies.
Enter Altmetric.
Short for alternative metrics.
Exactly. This was the big shift that really started gaining traction in the early 2010s. Publishers woke up and realized that the conversation had moved online. People were talking about science on blogs and social media, and they needed a tool to capture that social impact.
They needed a way to quantify the buzz.
Yes, to measure the noise.
I think a lot of people who read research papers might have seen that little colorful donut shape on a paper's landing page and not really known what it was.
That's the Altmetric badge, right?
That's the one. It's essentially a giant listening engine. It crawls the web constantly looking for mentions of a specific paper. It usually tracks it by its digital ID, the DOI.
So it's scanning for that specific string of numbers and letters.
Right. It looks at major news outlets, the New York Times, The Guardian, CNN. It looks at science blogs. It looks at social media, so Twitter, Facebook, even Google Plus, back when this study was done.
RIP Google Plus.
Right. And it even looks at reference managers like Mendeley to see how many academics are saving the paper to read later. But it's not just a raw count, is it? It's not simply one tweet equals one vote.
No, it is heavily weighted. And that is a crucial detail for this deep dive. The algorithm knows that firing off a tweet is very low effort. So a tweet might only be worth, say, 1 point, depending on the exact version of the algorithm.
Makes sense.
But a dedicated story in a major news outlet that's worth significantly more, maybe 8 or 10 points, a blog post lands somewhere in the middle. The Altmetric score is the sum of all this weighted attention.
So it's a composite score of buzz. And unlike citations, which take half a decade, altmetrics happen in days.
Hours, sometimes. Minutes. And that speed is incredibly addictive for journal editors and university press officers. It gives them this immediate real-time feedback on whether a story has landed with the public.
It tells you if the world cares right now.
Yes. It allows a journal to point to a paper and say, look, we published the most discussed, most viral paper of the entire year.
Okay, so for this study we're looking at today, the researchers used this altmetric score as their ultimate yardstick for popularity. They basically said, let's see what drives this score up. But I want to ask, why choose cancer? Why not look at, geology or economics?
It comes down to high stakes and high volume. The paper explicitly notes that global oncology spending hit roughly $100 billion in 2014.
Wow. 100 billion.
It is a massive, sprawling industry. You have huge pharmaceutical interests, massive government funding agencies, and incredibly motivated patient advocacy groups all interacting.
And I imagine the amount of research being produced is just staggering.
It's a flood. It's almost incomprehensible. Over 100,000 research articles are published every single year in the field of cancer alone.
100,000? That's nearly 300 papers a day.
Roughly, yes.
No human doctor can read that. No patient trying to understand their diagnosis can read that. Even the most hyper-focused specialist couldn't possibly keep up with that volume.
Exactly. It's physically impossible. So, because we can't read it all, we rely on filters. We rely on the media and these algorithms to curate that giant pile of 100,000 papers and tell us, hey, here are the 5 things that actually matter today.
And the goal of this study was to figure out if that filter is actually working.
Right. Is the media picking the best, most rigorous science from that massive pile? Or are they just picking the shiny objects?
Okay, so let's look at how they set this trap, so to speak. Because obviously they couldn't manually analyze all 100,000 papers. How did they build their cohort for the study?
They started by focusing on the prestige journals. They selected journals that have very high impact factors.
Let's pause there for a second. Impact factor.
Yeah.
We hear this term thrown around in academia a lot. It's basically the brand value of the journal, right?
In a practical sense, yes.
Yeah.
Technically, it's a metric calculated by taking the number of citations a journal received in the last 2 years and dividing it by the total number of articles they published in that time.
So it's an average citation rate.
Exactly. So a massive historic journal like the New England Journal of Medicine or NEJM or The Lancet, they have massive impact factors. Everyone reads them, everyone cites them. A highly niche regional journal might have a very low one.
So the researchers here went straight for the heavy hitters.
They did. They picked 47 journals across oncology, general medicine, and experimental medicine. Then they went to PubMed, which is basically this standard biomedical search engine, and searched for papers published in the first half of 2014, so January 1st to June 30th.
And what was the key word? Just the word cancer?
Literally just the word cancer in the title or the abstract, but, and this is probably the most important filter they applied, they only wanted papers that evaluated a treatment.
Oh, interesting. So they weren't looking at basic science like, we found a weird protein in a petri dish that might do something in 20 years.
Correct. They specifically excluded animal studies, they excluded diagnostics, they excluded biomarkers, and they excluded those narrative reviews where an expert just sort of writes down their general opinion on a topic.
They wanted hard data on interventions?
Yes. Chemotherapy regimens, surgical techniques, radiotherapy, supportive care, real actionable treatments meant for real human patients.
And that distinction is so vital because that's the stuff patients actually care about when they see a headline. The questions are always, will this drug help me? Or should my dad undergo this specific surgery? So after filtering out the mice and the opinion pieces, what did they have left?
They narrowed it down to a final cohort of 792 articles across 31 different journals.
That's a really solid data set, almost 800 papers. So now they needed to see which of those 792 went viral. But, and I found this fascinating, they didn't measure the virality immediately upon publication, did they?
No, they didn't. They intentionally waited. They collected the final Altmetric scores on May 1st, 2015, so that's at least 10 months after the publication of the very last article in their window.
Why the delay? Why not measure it right away?
It has to do with the viral life cycle of news. Most online attention spikes incredibly hard in the first few days or weeks, and then it trails off. By waiting nearly a year, they ensured the score had fully stabilized.
Right. It gives these slower-moving stories a chance to accumulate their blog posts and policy mentions rather than just capturing the initial Twitter storm.
Exactly. It captured the total aggregate footprint of the article's public attention.
Okay, so they have the 792 papers, and they have the final buzz scores for each one. Now they need the predictors. They need to figure out what specific characteristics caused a score to go up or stay flat. What were the suspects they looked at?
They looked at several potential drivers. First, they looked at that journal impact factor we just talked about. Basically asking, does simply being published in a famous journal guarantee you more tweets and news articles?
Which seems highly likely, honestly. If a paper drops in The Lancet, health reporters are naturally paying attention.
Exactly. Second, they looked at the funding source. Was the study paid for by a for-profit entity like Big Pharma? Or by a nonprofit, like a government grant or a charity?
Oh, that's interesting. Kind of testing for public cynicism versus trust.
Third, they looked at open access. Can anyone with an internet connection actually read the paper? Or is it locked behind an academic paywall?
A huge factor in the internet age.
Fourth, they analyzed the abstract conclusion. Was the news good? Like, did the experimental treatment actually work? Or was the conclusion bad or neutral?
Testing the theory of whether optimism drives clicks.
That was the hypothesis, yeah. Fifth, and this is arguably the most important one for our whole deep dive today, the study design.
Quality versus quantity.
Right. Was the paper a randomized controlled trial, which is the absolute gold standard of medical evidence, or was it just a lower-level observational study?
We're definitely going to have to unpack that distinction in a minute.
We will. And finally, the ultimate wildcard variable, the press release. Did the author's university or the journal itself actively put out a press release for this specific article?
The marketing push.
Right.
I really want to get to the results. Because when I read this paper, the very first thing that jumped out from the data wasn't the noise of the viral hits.
Yeah.
It was the silence.
The silence is absolutely deafening in this data. We have this perception, right, that the internet is just constantly screaming about science. Every day there's a new breakthrough. But when you look at the actual numbers, most science just drops into a total void.
Give us the numbers on the void.
Out of the 792 articles in this high-quality cohort, 218 of them received an Altmetric score of absolute zero.
Zero.
Zero. That's 27.5%. Not a single tweet. Not one blog post, no news coverage anywhere in the world.
That is almost a third of the entire cohort, published in prestige journals dealing with actual human cancer treatments, and they effectively vanished without a trace.
Nothing.
It's profoundly sad in a way. I mean, imagine being a researcher. You work for 3-4 years on a clinical cancer trial, you navigate peer review, you finally get it published in a major journal, and just total silence.
It really highlights the brutal struggle for attention in the modern era. And honestly, even for the ones that didn't get a zero, the numbers were incredibly low across the board. The median Altmetric score for the entire group was 2.0.
2. A score of 2 is basically, what, the lead author tweeting a link to it and their mom liking it.
Essentially, yes. Maybe a colleague retweeting it once. To put it in a broader perspective, nearly 65% of all the articles had a score between 1 and 50.
Which is still basically nothing in the grand scheme of internet traffic.
Right. And at the very top end, only 1.1%, just 9 articles out of nearly 800, managed to get a score over 200.
So going viral, truly going viral, is a unicorn event. It is statistically a massive anomaly.
Absolutely. Most science is quiet. Very quiet. But we as consumers don't perceive that reality because the algorithms only ever feed us that top 1%. We see the rare viral hits and we subconsciously assume that every scientific discovery looks like that.
We only see the winners.
Yeah.
So the big question naturally becomes, how do you get into that 1%? How do you get your research onto the front page of the New York Times? Let's talk about those drivers we mentioned. What actually moved the needle?
The statistical analysis identified 4 significant factors that drove up attention scores. But I have to say, one factor is so overwhelmingly powerful that it completely dwarfed everything else.
And it wasn't the quality of the science, was it?
It was not. It was the press release.
I had a feeling. Let's talk about the specific numbers here. How much of a difference does a press release actually make?
The researchers used a statistical measure called the ratio of mean, or ROM. The presence of a press release was associated with a ROM of 10.14.
Okay, 10.14. Translate that into plain English for us.
It means that, holding all other things equal, an article that had a dedicated press release received roughly 10 times the total attention score of an article that did not have one.
10 times. That's not just a little nudge. That's a rocket booster. That is literally the difference between being completely invisible and being the headline topic of the day.
It is an order of magnitude difference. If you are a scientist and you don't issue a press release, you are essentially whispering into a hurricane. If you do issue one, you are suddenly holding a megaphone. And honestly, this aligns perfectly with what we already know about how modern science journalism actually operates.
Right, the whole concept of journalism.
Exactly, journalism. The reality is that science journalists today are incredibly overworked. Newsrooms have shrunk. A health reporter might have a quota of 3 or 4 stories they have to file every single day.
They simply don't have the time to sit down, log into PubMed, and read dense 40-page PDFs to organically find a good story.
They don't, so they rely on centralized feeds. There's a database called Alert, for example, where universities and journal publishers post all their formatted press releases.
Like a buffet for busy journalists.
Precisely. They rely on the university press officers to spoon-feed them the narrative. If you hand a journalist a neatly packaged summary with a catchy, pre-written headline and a couple of pull quotes from the lead researcher, they will write about it. If you don't package it for them, they won't even know your paper exists.
It's a literal pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
The scientist explains it to their press officer. The press officer writes the simplified release. The journalist rewrites the release into an article, and then the public reads the rewrite.
And somewhere along that giant game of telephone, nuance is almost always lost. But the attention is definitely gained. This finding really confirms that media attention is not some organic measure of public interest or scientific merit. It is a highly manufactured outcome of public relations.
That is sobering. Okay, so PR is king. What were the other drivers?
The second biggest driver they found was open access. The ratio of mean here was 1.48.
So roughly a 50% bump in attention if the paper is free to read.
Yes. Which makes perfect logical sense for the social web. If I share a link to a new cancer study on Twitter, and you click it, but you immediately hit a wall that says, pay $35 to read this article.
I bounce immediately.
Everyone bounces. You don't retweet it. You don't discuss the methodology and the replies. But if the full text is just right there, engagement actually happens. It removes the friction of sharing.
It's the paywall of death for virality.
Yeah.
And people can't see the data. They can't share the data.
Precisely. Accessibility is a massive driver.
What about the prestige factor we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
Did the brand name of the journal matter in the end?
It did matter. The journal impact factor had a ROM of 1.10.
Now, 1.10 sounds really small compared to the 10x multiplier of the press release.
It sounds small, but remember, that is per single point of impact factor. It's a continuous scale. So if your paper moves from a journal with an impact factor of 2 up to a highly prestigious journal with an impact factor of 12, which is a 10-point jump, your attention score effectively doubles or triples.
Ah, I see.
Because the media watches those big journals, the Lancet, JAMA, NEJM, much, much more closely, they operate on the assumption that if it's printed in the Lancet, it is automatically news. It's a heuristic shortcut for quality.
The brand does the heavy lifting. And the final driver was funding, right?
Yes. They found that nonprofit funding was associated with higher media attention in ROM of 1.45 compared to studies funded by for-profit entities like pharmaceutical companies.
Why do you think that is? Do people just inherently trust charities more than pharma?
There's very likely a trust element, yes. Journalists might be naturally more skeptical of a drug trial fully funded by Pfizer than a trial funded by the American Cancer Society. But there's also a structural outreach element to consider.
What do you mean?
Nonprofits often have a core mission to, quote-unquote, raise awareness. They literally have entire departments dedicated to getting their research into the mainstream news cycle in order to drive public donations and influence government policy. Pharma companies, on the other hand, often just want to talk to doctors and FDA regulators. They don't necessarily need the general public to read their phase 2 trial results unless it's part of a massive new drug launch.
That makes a lot of sense. The motives for PR are different.
Okay,
so if we zoom out, we basically have the ultimate recipe for a viral paper here. You publish in a big-name journal, you make sure it's open access, you have nonprofit backing, and most importantly, you write a killer press release.
That is the exact formula. If you do those 4 things, your Altmetric score is going to go up.
Now comes the twist, the dark side of this data. Because we know what did drive attention, but we really need to talk about what didn't drive attention. Because this is where what I call the quality disconnect happens.
Yes, and this is the part of the paper that should genuinely worry anyone who relies on the news or social media for health advice.
To really understand this, we need to do a very quick crash course on the hierarchy of evidence. Because in the scientific community, not all studies are created equal.
Right, correct. It is not a flat landscape. Think of medical evidence as a pyramid. Down at the bottom of the pyramid, you have your observational studies.
Give us a concrete example of an observational study.
Sure. An observational study looks at data that already exists in the real world. So, for example, we surveyed 10,000 people. We asked them how many cups of coffee they drink every week, and then we checked their medical records 10 years later to see if they got cancer.
And if the data shows that the heavy coffee drinkers got slightly less cancer, the morning news headline says, "Coffee cures cancer."
Exactly. But from a scientific standpoint, that study design is incredibly weak. Because it only shows correlation, it does not show causation.
Right, because there are a million other factors.
Exactly. Maybe people who drink a lot of coffee also happen to be wealthier, so they have better baseline health care. Maybe they smoke less. Maybe they exercise more. The researchers can try to mathematically adjust for those things, but they can never be 100% sure. It's full of what we call confounding variables. It merely observes the world. It doesn't intervene in it.
Okay, so that's the weak stuff at the bottom. What is at the top of the pyramid?
The randomized controlled trial, the RCT. This is the gold standard of medicine. In an RCT, you take 10,000 people, you randomly assign half of them to drink coffee every day, and you force the other half to only drink water. You control their environment as much as possible.
And
If the coffee group gets significantly less cancer, you know for a fact it was the coffee that did it, because the randomization eliminated all those other confounding variables. This proves actual causation.
So logically, if we assume that people care about good, reliable science, the media should be largely ignoring the weak observational stuff at the bottom and obsessing over the RCTs at the top. The RCTs are the actual truth.
Logically, yes. If media attention followed true scientific merit, RCTs would be the absolute superstars of the internet. But That is not what this study found.
What did they find?
They found absolutely no evidence that high-level study designs get more media attention.
Not at all.
None. In fact, the data actually showed a trend in the opposite direction. When compared directly to those weak observational studies, the rigorous RCTs had an ROM of 0.65.
Wait, 0.65? That means they actually got less attention.
They got less. Now, the p-value on that specific finding was 0.059, so it was just barely on the edge of strict statistical significance, but the signal in the data is clearly there. The media seems to actively prefer the weaker observational studies over the rigorous gold standard clinical trials.
That is just wild. Why? Why on earth would a scientifically weaker study be more popular online?
Think about the nature of the headlines they generate. Observational studies are almost always about everyday lifestyle factors. Bacon causes colon cancer, a glass of red wine prevents heart disease, sitting is the new smoking.
They're highly relatable.
Exactly. They offer simple, bite-sized lifestyle advice. They fit perfectly into a 2-minute news-you-can-use segment on morning television. They are the absolute lowest hanging fruit for engagement.
Whereas an RCT is usually, well, complex.
An RCT is usually a headline like, Compound XJ452 shows a 4% improvement in progression-free survival in stage 4 non-small cell lung cancer when compared to standard of care.
Yeah, total snooze fest. I mean, obviously, it's incredibly vital for humanity, but my aunt isn't going to retweet that to her followers.
Exactly. It's boring to the lay public. It's rigorous. It's vital. It literally saves lives. But it's terrible clickbait. So the viral filter of the internet isn't actually filtering for scientific truth. It's filtering for relatability. It's filtering for narratives that comfortably fit into our pre-existing anxiety about diet, exercise, and lifestyle.
And they found the exact same thing with systematic reviews, right?
Okay.
Which, for the listener, are studies that mathematically combine the results of dozens of other studies, which is essentially the absolute peak of the evidence pyramid.
Yes, they looked at those too. And they found no significant difference in media attention when compared to observational studies. The media literally cannot tell the difference, or, more likely, simply chooses not to care between the highest quality evidence and the lowest. To the algorithm, content is just content.
That is incredibly damning for the state of science journalism. It means the science news ecosystem is structurally biased toward lower quality science. But what about the actual results of the studies? Surely if an RCT says, hey, we actually found a cure, that gets way more shares than a study that says, well, the drug failed.
You would certainly think so. We assume optimism sells. But the study found that articles with conclusions explicitly favoring the experimental treatment were not associated with higher Altmetric scores at all.
Really?
The ROM was 0.97. It was basically a complete statistical wash.
So neutral or even negative results get shared just as much as positive breakthroughs.
It seems so, and this was a major surprise to the researchers. But if you think about how media works, a failed drug can be a massive story too. Highly anticipated controversial cancer drug completely fails in phase 3 trials is a very clickable headline. Or common daily treatment found to be completely useless.
Outrage and controversy drive clicks just as efficiently as optimism.
Exactly. Or perhaps the nuance of the headline matters much more than the actual scientific conclusion. A study might have a perfectly neutral result saying drug X is statistically the same as drug Y, but the university press release spins it as important new questions raised about the efficacy of drug Y.
Right. Spin is incredibly powerful. If the frame of the press release is dramatic enough, the actual boring scientific conclusion, whether it's positive, negative, or neutral, matters far less than the drama of the announcement itself. So let's talk about the real-world implications of this. Because this isn't just academic gossip about who gets the most retweets. This dynamic affects real people in hospitals and clinics every day. Why should the listener, who might not be an oncologist or a researcher, care deeply about this viral fallacy?
Because we all make personal health decisions based on this ambient noise. When bad or weak science goes viral, it changes mass behavior, often long before the actual scientific community has settled on the truth. The authors of this paper cite some genuinely terrifying examples in their discussion section, where the media tail completely wagged the scientific dog.
Let's dig into those examples. The strep A one was crazy to read about.
Yes. A few decades ago, there was this massive media frenzy about, quote-unquote, flesh-eating bacteria related to group A strep. It was an incredibly terrifying narrative. It went viral before viral was even a term. The killer bacteria is coming for your kids, basically.
Was there an actual outbreak happening?
No, that's the crazy part. The actual underlying epidemiology showed that the number of sick kids hadn't changed at all. The baseline infection rate was completely flat. But the fear had absolutely spiked because of the wall-to-wall media coverage. And suddenly, panicked parents were rushing to pediatric emergency rooms, demanding rapid strep tests for every minor sore throat or sniffle,
They were just clogging up the whole system.
clogging the ERs, wasting millions of dollars in medical resources, and tragically delaying care for kids who were actually severely ill with other things, all because of a viral news narrative that wasn't backed by an actual epidemiological spike. The media literally created a health crisis where there physically wasn't one.
That is wild. And what about the hormone replacement therapy example, the HRT story?
That is a classic textbook case of media impact. In the early 2000s, there was huge, explosive media coverage of the Women's Health Initiative study, which linked HRT to a higher risk of breast cancer. The news coverage was inescapable, and it caused striking, immediate changes in real-world behavior. Millions of women simply stopped taking their HRT almost overnight.
But wait, isn't that a good thing? If it causes breast cancer, they should stop.
Right,
Okay.
it's heavily nuanced. And that's exactly the problem with viral science. For some specific women, the increased risk was very real, and stopping was correct. But for many others, the benefits regarding bone density, heart health, and basic quality of life far outweighed the very small absolute risk increase.
But the media coverage removed all of that nuance.
Completely. The headline was just HRT causes cancer, HRT bad. As a result, countless women suffered through totally debilitating menopause symptoms unnecessarily for years, simply because they were terrified by the simplified headlines. The clinical guidelines eventually settled into a much more personalized middle ground, but public opinion had already swung wildly out of control based on the initial viral explosion.
It's the absolute versus relative risk problem. And they mentioned statins too, right?
Yeah.
The cholesterol drugs.
Same exact story. Every single time a new study comes out claiming statins cause muscle pain or memory loss. And these are very often based on those lower quality observational studies or just anecdotal patient reports. Thousands of people get scared and start taking their life-saving heart medication. And people objectively have preventable heart attacks because of it.
So this noise we're talking about,
Yeah.
it isn't harmless clickbait. It fundamentally changes behavior. It changes how we seek care. And in some cases, it kills people.
It does. If the loudest megaphone in society is consistently given to the weakest science, the observational lifestyle studies, and the spun press releases, people are building their health decisions on a foundation of sand. We are reacting to noise rather than signal.
This leads to a really difficult, almost philosophical question for any researchers who might be listening to this deep dive. If you are a scientist and you are doing the rigorous, boring, vital RCTs, what are you supposed to do? The data literally says you're going to be ignored by the public.
This paper is essentially a giant wake-up call for the scientific community. It says, in no uncertain terms, if you want your science to have a real-world impact, you have to play the game.
Just having high quality isn't enough to get noticed anymore.
It is not. The authors are quite explicit about this in their conclusions. Researchers must use press releases, and they must push for open access if they want broad dissemination. You can no longer just publish your life's work in a good journal, sit back, and hope the world naturally notices its brilliance. You have to actively advocate for your work.
You have to become a marketer.
Yes, you have to budget your grant money to pay the open access publication fees. You have to sit down and work closely with your university's press office to draft a compelling, maybe slightly punchy release.
It feels a bit dirty, doesn't it?
Oh.
Like, ideally, science shouldn't be about PR. It shouldn't be about selling the data to a journalist. It should just be about the objective truth.
It feels very uncomfortable to a lot of purists, yes. It feels like we are cheapening the scientific process. But look at the alternative reality the data presents. If you don't play the PR game, your incredibly rigorous RCT sits in the zero club forever. Meanwhile, some flashy but fundamentally flawed observational study dominates the weekly news cycle and convinces millions of people to drink, celery juice to cure their cancer.
So you almost have a moral obligation to play the PR game, just to drown out the bad science.
In the modern information age, attention is a strictly finite resource. You have to compete for it. If good, rigorous science stubbornly withdraws from the battlefield of public attention out of pride, bad science wins by default. If you truly believe your work matters to patients, you have to fight to make it heard.
That's a really powerful way to frame it. PR is a moral duty for rigorous scientists. I love that. But before we wrap up today, we need to be good scientists ourselves and look at the limitations of the paper we're discussing, because no study is perfect, not even this one.
Absolutely. And we should apply the exact same skepticism to this paper that we just advocated applying to everything else. First off, there's the inherent issue of social media noise.
Right, the sheer volume of data Altmetric has to sift through.
Exactly. Millions and millions of tweets. Altmetric is a fantastic tool, but it's not omniscient. It relies heavily on users linking to the paper correctly. If I just tweet, wow, a new study says coffee cures cancer, but I don't actually include a link to the original DOI, Altmetric won't catch that engagement.
So they might actually be undercounting the true cultural spread of some of these viral ideas.
Definitely. The general vibe or the narrative of a study might go incredibly viral even if the direct link to the journal doesn't. Also, their search strategy for building the cohort was a bit broad.
They just use the keyword cancer, right?
Right. That catches a lot of the big stuff, but it might completely miss niche studies that use much more specific clinical terms in their titles, like carcinoma or melanoma, but don't explicitly type out the word cancer in the abstract.
And they only use Medline via PubMed.
Yes, just one single, albeit major database. And crucially, we have to remember that this study is a snapshot in time from 2014 and 2015.
Oh, right. The internet was a very different place 10 years ago. TikTok didn't even exist. The algorithms were totally different.
And honestly, if anything, I would argue the problem has gotten significantly worse since then. The social media algorithms prioritize emotional engagement and outrage even more aggressively today than they did in 2014. The gap between what is viral and what is true has very likely widened. The pressure for journalists to generate clicks has only increased.
They also mentioned in the paper that the statistics on the press release finding had a really wide confidence interval, didn't they?
Right, good catch. We said earlier it was a 10x multiplier. The math basically says they are 95% sure the multiplier is very big, but mathematically it could be anywhere from a 5x boost to a 20x boost. The specific number 10 is their best estimate, but the direction of the effect, the fact that press releases are massive drivers of attention, is statistically solid.
Got it. So we shouldn't get hung up on the exact number of 10, but we must accept that the lever itself is massive.
Precisely. The signal is crystal clear, even if the precise volume of that signal is hard to measure perfectly.
So where does this leave us at the end of all this? We've looked closely at the machine behind the headlines. We know now that popularity is driven largely by marketing, the press releases, and accessibility, the open access, and not by the actual quality of the clinical evidence.
We do. And I think the main takeaway for everyone listening is a call for critical consumption.
Being aware of the viral fallacy.
Yes. The very next time you see a medical headline or a viral tweet about a new health study, I want you to just pause. Do not look at the share count. That number tells you absolutely nothing about the truth of the claim. Look at the source.
Ask the hard questions before you share it. Is it an RCT? Or is it just a weak observational study telling me exactly what I want to hear about my favorite food?
Did this news story clearly come straight from a university press release? Or did a journalist actually dig into the raw data and interview independent experts? Is the paper published in a reputable journal?
It's all about looking past the shiny wrapper to see what's actually inside the box. Because as we've learned today, the shiny wrapper, the viral tweet, the breathless morning show segment is often just really good marketing. And sometimes it's wrapping up a pretty empty box.
And in a world where that specific information determines whether you take a medication or how you treat your own body, checking that wrapper is quite literally one of the most important critical thinking skills you can possibly develop.
Here is a final thought for you to chew on as we close out. If press releases are the single biggest driver of media attention, and press releases are written by institutions specifically to promote their own internal work, are we even living in an era of science news anymore, or is it just science advertising? And if that line is permanently blurred, how do we fix it?
That is a very provocative question, and unfortunately one we probably won't be able to solve today.
This paper is published under a Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 license, and full credit is provided in the episode description. Thank you for listening to One Paper Orbit Addle, our research paper podcast. Our goal is to make peer-reviewed research accessible to everyone. If this episode was helpful, please share your thoughts and let us know which papers you'd like us to explore next. Thank you.